Hi, welcome to the Aerospace Industries Association of Canada's podcast. It's hosted by me, Mike Mueller, Senior Vice President of AIAC. In each podcast, we will be exploring topics of interest to our sector by interviewing leaders in both the Canadian and international aerospace industry and relevant thought leaders in order to provide timely perspective and context in the world of aerospace in Canada. AIAC is committed to serving its members by being the bridge between industry and the government while bringing industry together, acting as its voice. Hope you enjoyed the pod. Well, welcome to the podcast. I hope that everyone has been enjoying the last few days of summer. Your team here at AIAC has been working hard throughout, ensuring that through all the political twists and turns of what has turned out to be a pretty interesting summer politically, that aerospace has been front and center for the decision makers, both in government and in Parliament. As our members will know, we've been advocating for both a national strategy and support for our industry through COVID-19, as I don't think it will be a surprise to anyone that aerospace has been very hard hit, and we want to ensure that the over 200,000 workers we support remain employed in all regions of the country. Just in the last few weeks, we've seen our finance minister resign, a new finance minister appointed, Parliament being prorogued, a new leader of the official opposition, and we're looking forward next month to, I believe, a speech from the throne and a budget. So no better time to pull together a political panel to help us make sense of this all, especially from an aerospace perspective. So I want to introduce Brad Lavigne, Gabriela Gonzalez, and Jan Plante. So Brad Lavigne is Principal and Vice President at Counsel Public Affairs. Brad has over 25 years of communications, government relations, and political experience. Brad served as the New Democratic Party's National Campaign Director in the 2011 general election that resulted in the party's best election result in its 50-year history, becoming Canada's official opposition for the first time. You can reach out to him at www.counselpa.com. I also want to introduce Gabriela Gonzalez. Gabriela is a consultant with Crestview Strategies, working in the Toronto office. Prior to joining the Crestview team, Gabriela worked at Queen's Park for 4 years and is a longtime organizer with the Ontario Liberal Party and the Liberal Party of Canada. And you can reach her at crestvviewstrategy.com. And finally, rounding out the panel, we have Jan Plante, Senior Director at TACT. And Jan has served in leadership positions for over a decade, advising leaders and ministers on a wide variety of policies, programs, and strategic communications. Jan has served as Chief of Staff in the Ministries of Transport, Infrastructure, Communities, Intergovernmental Affairs, Economic Development Agency of Canada for the regions of Quebec, and was also Chief Strategist for the leader of Canada's official opposition. And you can reach him at tactconcil.ca. So we want to welcome you all to the podcast. Thanks for making the time to do this.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure to be here.
Great to be here.
Excellent. So maybe, Brad, I'll just start with you. You've witnessed a lot of shakeups on Parliament Hill over the years. You've seen how the status of the government of the day impacts its priorities, its governing style, and of course, throw in the extra challenge of COVID-19. Well, as we can see in the last couple of weeks, it definitely adds a recipe for a lot of uncertainty. And there's lessons from the past that we can glean from. The tone will be set with the new speech from the throne. And on the aerospace side of things, we'll definitely be looking for some kind of recognition regarding the economically strategic importance of our industry, and a recognition that we are uniquely positioned as an industry to play a role in Canada's overall economic recovery. So what's your sense moving forward? How do you see the government setting up priorities? And how do you think industries such as aerospace can expect from this new reset Parliament in a couple of weeks?
Right. Yeah, no, there's a lot there. And I think you're absolutely right, Mike, about the level of uncertainty that many Canadians have. And that's really an opportunity for the Trudeau government to come in with a very, I think, ambitious agenda when it comes to the throne speech, and then following that up with either a mini budget or an economic update sometime throughout the fall. That uncertainty leads to opportunity, because I think a lot of Canadians want to know that the federal government, is there and is doing everything it can to get people back to work. And I don't even know if we've seen the full effects of the economic downturn with COVID-19 just yet. I think that in different parts of the country, it's playing itself out in different ways, different supply chains, different reactions from other countries. We have obviously issues with the Americans rattling their sabers because of their election. So all of this provides what I would submit to be a wonderful opportunity. Not many Canadians want an election this fall. We just had one just 10 months ago. I don't think that there's a lot of folks who are out there pining for another election. Although what we've seen from the Bloc Québécois, we've seen a lot of saber rattling from them. It's unlikely the Conservatives under Mr. O'Toole's new leadership is likely to support this government in a confidence motion, which the throne speech and a mini budget would be. So that really leaves it up to the NDP and the Liberals to iron out something concrete. I think what a lot of people are looking for is for the NDP, and Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the New Democratic Party, spoke about it just a short while ago, talking about his priorities that he's looking for in the throne speech. I think that there's enough common ground between the two leaders to cover it off and to have an ambitious agenda in the throne speech backed up by an aggressive fiscal and monetary agenda in a mini budget. And that means spending on things that get people back to work. And that's precisely where aerospace fits in. I think aerospace is very well situated in terms of playing that role. The story in Ottawa has been told very well with the campaign, the Vision campaign over the last number of years, that aerospace provides good paying jobs. It attracts global capital to set up shop here in Canada and creates good paying jobs in a high value manufacturing context. So I'm looking forward a very aggressive agenda. Put the politics aside. Let's get people back to work. And aerospace, I think, will be a key component within that.
I couldn't agree more, Brad, on getting people back to work. And, the 200,000 good paying jobs that we have is something we've been definitely telling decision makers across the board. And we're going to get into it a little bit further, in the podcast, but just taking a look at what other countries are doing with respect to aerospace. We really want to, get a sense from you guys as what we can expect here. Maybe Jan, anything from your perspective on the new reset of Parliament? We got the new Conservative leader coming in, and there's lots of different shifting sands, if you will.
Yeah, so I also agree a lot with what Brad just said, and I would say that although speech from Throne may not be the most exciting thing for people outside of the political bubble, it is still a very important piece for the government as a whole. Why? Because it's the foundation of the House. So it's the narrative that will be used by the Prime Minister, cabinet ministers, political staff, and the public servants in advancing their files moving forward. So the speech from the Throne will guide them in the upcoming months. And in other words, if the file one person is working on now can't fit one way or another within what is said in the speech from the Throne, then it indicates that this person should work on something else. So again, it may not be super exciting for average people at home, but for people inside the bubble, the speech from the Throne is very important as a guide that will help them moving forward. And for the industry as well, I think you did an interesting job by publishing a poll recently, Mike, at the AIAC, where we could see that 85% of Canadians are open to the idea of more investments in the industry. And I think governments love polls and look at polls, even though they're saying the opposite. The reality is politicians are looking at polls all the time. And that's a good thing you did that, and it will help the government to see that there's an appetite within Canadians for more investment in this very important industry. And about the new Conservative leader, I would say that I don't think they would support the Prime Minister right now because both the Bloc Québécois and Conservatives called for the Prime Minister's resignation recently. So you can only throw that ball once. And the only logical next step to this, when the Prime Minister actually stays in the job, is to do anything to provoke an election. Otherwise, you're not serious. So I agree with Brad. Then it all comes down to, the NDP will decide either to keep the government alive and working with it or to bring it down, which is unlikely in the next fall. Maybe an election is more likely next spring or in 2021. Either it will be a call that the Prime Minister will make himself or that the oppositions will make. But I don't see an election before Christmas this year.
I think you just mentioned an important point, Jan. All parties have a role to play in a minority parliament, which is why we've struck what we call an Aerospace Caucus, where we interface with members of parliament from all parties that have taken an interest and have some influence with respect to airspace. And I just do a little promo plug for folks listening to this. We will be having a members-only webinar with the Airspace members of Parliament next week. So make sure you tune in for that. Gabriela, maybe just, we talked a little bit about the speech from the Throne. We've been really pushing the need for a national strategy And quite frankly, even before COVID-19 hit, aerospace was losing ground. And I think there's a clear understanding amongst the industry, and we've been really pushing with government that our collective competition is really global. And we've seen, our competing countries investing substantial amounts of money into aerospace because, as we talked about before, those good paying jobs that are there. So maybe what do you expect, we can see from this government in the next, both the speech from the throne and then a budget or mini budget, as Brad had said?
Yeah, before I get into the budget, I want to talk about, the aerospace sector role in this restart and specifically about the green recovery. And green recovery is not just about windmills and solar panels. It's about greening government and greening industries, including aerospace. So my recommendation would be to actually talk about, what is the sector doing on green recovery? How are you greening the sector? Whether it's fleet fuel efficiency and reducing the environmental impact for air travel. I think that kind of message will resonate with this government. It's very aligned with the green recovery and the green restart that Freeland has been talking about. And also, you open with the jobs numbers. That is a real important part as well of the conversation. And Freeland, in addition to talking about, equitable and inclusive and green recovery, to talk about growth and jobs. And they want to get people back to work and jobs. So that is a really compelling story that I suspect, the finance and PMO will want to hear. In terms of the budget, I think that the government is still figuring out whether it will be sort of a fiscal and economic update or a mini budget, as Brad mentioned. And, it's tough to turn around a budget within this sort of just a few months, knowing that the March budget had to be put on hold because of the pandemic. But if someone can can take this Herculean task and actually carry it through, that's Freeland. And as she did with the NAFTA renegotiation, we know she can, do complicated things really quickly. And so, whether it's a fiscal update or a budget, I suspect it will be closely tied to the speech from the throne. And it will have an ambitious nation building message. One is that focus on supporting Canadians as opposed to corporations, and more focus on supporting people as opposed to the government being sort of fiscally responsible, which is what, Morneau was really pushing for. He talked about, deficits, but with Freeland as the finance minister, she will focus on that and how are we supporting people who work in the gig economy? How are we supporting women, working families? And, what she talks about, this equitable restart. We know that the government is used to looking at budgets from a different lens. For the past, the previous 4 years, they talked about a gender balance, gender lens to all this government decision making. I suspect that will add a second lens, and that will be a fairness lens.
Interesting. And, your comments earlier about, the green sustainable budget. Aerospace, and this is something we've been talking to government about, but aerospace definitely, Canadian aerospace in particular is a world leader on this. And, during this time, it's really time to double down on that. So I think, where the industry is and where the industry is going and where the government thought is on that particular item is very well aligned. Brad, anything, on specific to the mini budget and sort of competing priorities?
Well, I just want to pick up on the green aspect that Gabriela was mentioning. I think that the government has signaled, quite repeatedly their desire that the recovery will be a green one, and it's a real opportunity. I use opportunity a lot because I truly believe that there's so much of it with COVID. It's an opportunity for the federal government to set a new course and correct that which we've gotten wrong, or that's just kind of been established many years ago. The aerospace sector, we have to ensure that our decision makers, as well as the public, see aerospace as part of that solution. And you alluded to, a bit ago, Canada being a world leader, but, just, two quick things. Highlighting the green aspect, I know, is something that we've done, at the provincial level with the association as well, because a lot of provinces are placing a great emphasis on green recovery as well. First battery powered airplane or even equipping our frontline people with the tools to combat climate change. Right now in British Columbia, tremendous amount of wildfires are raging, and aerospace is part of that firefighting technology that we can export the world over, because whether it's in Australia or, in British Columbia, doesn't matter where on the globe, aerospace in Canada can be part of that, that climate change fighting thing. So it's about how we look at it. It's not just, domestic air travel, business air travel, or even international air travel that we're looking at here. We're looking at the whole range of what aerospace provides and the jobs and the investment that come with it. So, right now, I think that there's a tremendous appetite among the public for governments to invest. I don't believe there's an appetite for austerity to cut back. And we just need to make sure that our voices continue to be heard at that table. And hopefully the new finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, with her global affairs hat that she's had as a former minister of international affairs or trade, these files, she'll know what our competitors are up to. You alluded to it, Mike, about what France is up to, what the Americans are up to. They are investing billions of dollars in their aerospace sectors. And that is bad news for Canada. Not only does that hamper our ability to attract new capital, but it places at risk the jobs that are already here. And for any politician who thinks that, because a particular sector or company is doing well in aerospace right now, these folks are being lured away in many jurisdictions the world over from Canada. That'll cost big jobs. That'll cost investment. That'll cost revenue for the communities that aerospace supports. So hopefully Chrystia Freeland will identify from her previous cabinet posts the competition that we're up against and begin to be part of that inside cabinet champion for a national strategy here in Canada.
I agree, Brad, that, the global nature of especially aerospace is so different than a lot of other sectors and really makes our industry unique. Jan, you'd mentioned before the poll that we did, and thanks for bringing that up. We had done a bit of a poll through Galera, and some of the results back we got was when people were made aware of the impact of aerospace, there was a strong support for the government to invest in those jobs and those technologies, and it really made people proud. Maybe, Jan, can you give us a bit of a flavor from, you're based in Quebec City, Montreal, Gatineau, from a bit of a Quebec perspective, just on, what a mini budget would or could look like?
Yeah, well, and I'll lend to that. Well, just go first, Mike, that just want to add to what Ollie just said, that, budgets are, of course, very important for obvious reasons, setting all the financial considerations, intention of the government in terms of spending, revenues, economic growth, and so on. But beyond that, budgets are also powerful communication and political tools for government. And it's a way to take control of the political agenda, again, which the government have lost a bit in the last few weeks. So the next budget will allow, the Prime Minister and his team to roll out a thorough communications and political plan across the country. It will help them to contrast with opposition parties, especially the Conservatives. It will allow them to have all caucus members doing announcements all over the country. So we should expect that the budget will also be very political in its narrative, trying to please a lot of people within the accessible voters of the government. And it will either be an election platform, should the government call a snap election on it, or a very great tool to govern moving forward. For the aerospace industry, and brings back to what you just mentioned about the Quebec perspective, but also I would say the Ontario perspective. So aerospace is great for jobs, for its symbolic, like people, especially in Quebec, care a lot about this industry. But for the government, the perspective of a budget being as well political, it's also, we have to realize that most of the industry is in Quebec and Ontario, where it is a real battlefield for the next election and for every election, actually. So it's kind of an alignment of all the stars for the government to do something for the aerospace industry. Actually, I would think they would miss an opportunity not to do it, not only because it would be good public policy, but it would be good politics as well.
Yeah, and I think there's sometimes a misconception that aerospace is focused in Quebec. But I mean, Brad, as you know, British Columbia, huge sector out there. Gabriela, Calgary's got a burgeoning aerospace sector. The Greater Toronto area, Winnipeg. It's truly a national industry across the board. Maybe just turning, you've all been political insiders, and so let's just sort of lift the veil on what's going on behind the scenes. We have a new Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland, generally speaking, very highly regarded. Brad, you'd mentioned, she's been Minister of International Trade, Foreign Affairs. She's got that sort of global background. How do you guys see this all happening? We had some tension with the previous finance minister. Will Minister Freeland have the autonomy and flexibility, or do you anticipate things will be driven from the center, as political folks like to say, from the Prime Minister and his office? Any insight you can give there? Maybe Gabriela, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I would honestly consider Minister Freeland as part of the center, as Deputy Prime Minister. We know she's the most trusted member of cabinet and the most effective. And even, during the press conference when she was announced as new finance minister, she acknowledged that obviously there are, difference of opinions between her and the Prime Minister at times. But those are worked out, behind closed doors and in private. And that it's very important that you show a united front when speaking publicly as a government. And, as liberals, we know that that kind of infighting can actually bring down a government. So I'm really glad to see that kind of attitude from her. She's someone that, sees eye to eye with Trudeau on the important things. We know that Trudeau recruited her because of the book she wrote about income inequality and the role that governments can play in minimizing that inequality. So in the big picture stuff, they see eye to eye. And I suspect that she will be driving the budget and this recovery with a strong support from PMO.
Interesting. Jan, what, from your perspective, what are you seeing?
I agree with Gabriela. I think that the Prime Minister relies a lot on Minister Freeland. It's obvious that she is the operator and the fixer of this government. Every Prime Minister has one or two fixers, as we say in politics, where, when they have issues or problems, they always go to these people to take on a new challenge to fix issues or to promote, the agenda of the government. And Minister Freeland seems to be that person for the Prime Minister. So to me, it's kind of obvious they will work together on the budget. And I would add that, departure of the former Minister of Finance, in part because he wanted to slow the spending pace, advocates for a government that will just double down with even more spending on a short term. And Prime Minister Trudeau's strategic positioning has always been to take votes from the NDP, not to the Conservatives. So in continuing to spend like he does, he continues to try to appeal to the NDP voters. So therefore, I just don't see him and his team doing any different for the rest of his political career, actually.
Interesting. Brad, any insight behind the scenes there?
Well, I can certainly, speculate what's going on behind the scenes. It's impossible to know precisely, but the weeks leading up to a throne speech in a minority context, especially when, let's say, two of the three opposition parties that have a balance of power have already stepped away. And so for Mr. Singh and the NDP, they are, sharpening their pencils and figuring out what are the issues that we want to put forward to the Prime Minister to see in his throne speech in order for them to vote for it. If they can extract, language or mentions, commitments to take action on a couple of their key files, then they can, feel confident to vote for the throne speech to say, we made a difference in this throne speech, that we're using our balance of power to bring Justin Trudeau over here. Maybe it's something on the healthcare front. Maybe it's an economic issue. Maybe it's something to do with, income inequality. Something that they think that the government, can do, but wouldn't do it without pressure. Then they're going to take that list of issues, hopefully go public with it to say, here's what we've said to the Prime Minister, maybe in a letter form, to say, we want action and language in the throne speech on the following issues. It'll be somewhat generic so that, you get caught up in the game. What if two of the three things you've asked for are in there? What if it's one? I mean, I did this when I worked for Jack Layton on Parliament Hill in the minority parliaments between 2004 and 2011. This stuff came up, annually, every time there was a throne speech. So it's a great opportunity for the fourth party to use its leverage. And it's also a good opportunity to get, issues that normally may not be put to the fore by the Liberals to get that done. So I'm happy that Alexandre Boularice, the NDP MP from Montreal, is active in the Aerospace Caucus. And I hope he can do some good work behind the scenes in Parliament Hill come third week of September when we all come back.
He's definitely been a great advocate for the industry, 100%. You speak about issues, and maybe the final question here, the final topic, how do we as an industry ensure that aerospace is one of those issues, Brad, that you had talked about? And maybe, just going a little bit, getting political and moving a little bit back. We got a new federal conservative leader. We touched on it a little bit before, but the Bloc Québécois said they want to force an election. The NDP have a real opportunity to influence the governing Liberals. And so a little bit of analysis on that. And then maybe if you could, each of you, close it off. You've all worked in politics. You're now working on behalf of various companies, clients. What is your best advice considering the political landscape right now? How should organizations, industry associations be approaching things in light of this? So maybe, Jan, I'll start with you. If you could, maybe touch on that conservative leader, how that changes things, and then, give us a little advice on how to make sure, as Brad said, aerospace is one of those issues that move forward.
Yeah. So, new conservative leader, we will see with time, but, Mr. Ojul got a clear mandate. He was elected with, a fair difference in between support between the second place. So there's no question about how strong his mandate is. His biggest challenge, Mike, will be to present a political offer to Canadian that will be, of course, acceptable for Western Canada, but that will be attractive east of Manitoba, which has been a challenge for the Conservative, especially with the last election with Mr. Scheer, where a lot of people in Quebec, Ontario, and Atlantic Canada just didn't want to even listen what Conservatives had to say. So that's his biggest challenge to me, and we'll see how he addressed that. In terms of advice, we need to keep in mind that in a minority situation, people are always kind of in a campaign mode situation. So in their minds, so the lens they use during an election campaign, like in 2019, to look at issues is now in their office with them, and they use this lens all the time to look at each issue and proposal and all the time. So it's with them. So they think short-term political gains when they look at everything. So that doesn't mean there's no room for long-term policy ideas that are great for the next generation, but they shall fit under short-term political gains, because that's how they behave. That's the only thing that's important in their mind right now. So how then you do this as an organization, how you ensure you're considered and you're part of the narrative. So I would say, it's as basic as you need to exist in Ottawa. You don't only speak to government when you have a crisis. So you need to cast a wide net of relations. For instance, some of my clients will have the instinct of just going to the kind of obvious minister because they are part of, let's say, the Minister of Innovation, so they're going to just speak with the Minister of Innovation. But the reality is the federal government is so big that it works a lot with cabinet committees. So you need to speak with ministers that sit at relevant cabinet committees because they may have a say to a decision that will concern you. And if they are not briefed well and they don't know about your file, they may, make a decision that will not be pleasant for you. It will a bit be because of you, because you didn't do what you had to do. So you need to develop and nurture those relationships. And I would say as well, you need to work around the triumvirate. So what's a triumvirate? It's an old Roman word meaning the alliance of three people to govern. That's an experienced deputy minister who said that to me in one of my first days in the job as chief of staff, and he was so right. The reality is decisions are taken with three pillars. So there's the minister, there's a deputy minister / the department, and then there's a chief of staff / the political. And in order to maximize your chances of success, you need to have those three pillars fully aligned on an issue. So in other words, if a minister leans toward making a decision you would like, but that his chief of staff and his deputy ministers always tell the minister it's not a good idea for whatever reason, the probability that he will make the decisions are pretty low. So you need to work on all those pillars because they are all equally important. And I would say the last tip I would give to our audience is that you should help the government to see opportunities for himself. So don't play the politics, but if you write 1 + 1 =, let them write 2. So provide them with facts, with data, show them the historic opportunity of doing something. So don't play the politics, but write 1 + 1 = and let them write 2.
I think that's wise advice, Jan, especially, if you're looking for something from government, it needs to be a partnership with government for them to take real ownership of it. And I really like, I couldn't agree more with you. Those relationships, before a crisis is what will sustain you through. And I think some of the work that we did is in particular with Vision 2025 and that advocacy outreach is really helping us now, in the midst of this crisis. Maybe Brad, I'll turn to you and then Gabriela to close it out. Brad, how important is a strong association or an industry group, especially at a time like this when we're going to government?
Well, I mean, it's crucial. But, the good news here is that, with the Vision 2025 document, a lot of it's been, a lot of the groundwork has been laid. The foundation has been built on which this opportunity now can be seized. And I'll agree. The idea of ongoing, constant presence with a wide spectrum of decision makers is always part of an effective government relations strategy. The one element I would add is portraying the sense of urgency. For some reason, it is frustratingly difficult to get Ottawa to understand the urgency with which the sector, faces many of its challenges. There seems to be a reluctance to act, effectively as well as quickly. And, to add that layer at this time. So we just come off and, we're still in the midst, of an unprecedented pandemic. We still don't even know the full economic impact of that. We have, massive unemployment and millions of Canadians relying on government supports to make ends meet on a month-to-month basis. I know those supports are in transition now, but the needs for them have not changed since the height of the pandemic. And here we are on the cusp of a throne speech, likely a mini budget in the coming handful of weeks, and to insert that sense of urgency that aerospace can be part of that solution. Good paying jobs, investment from away, good exports, part of that green recovery, but that action has to be taken now. And to emphasize that urgency, I think will serve the association and all of its employee members in good stead.
Well, it's also the sense of urgency, and then also, the realization that 80% of what we produce is export related. So we have a role, our industry in particular has a role to play with respect to the recovery. And that's another point that we've been making very strongly. Maybe Gabriela, just ending it with you, any, again, advice on how to make sure that aerospace is part of the decision-making process, and in particular, the role of a strong association and sort of hitting it from all different angles.
Yes, absolutely. So I have 3 comments. And one, kudos to the AIAC for the Parliamentary Aerospace Caucus. That is exactly, the best initiative you can take under a minority government, where you're building relationships and finding champions within government, and also engaging the opposition. We know that opposition support is critical in order for the government to continue its mandate. And the fact that you've been able to build those relationships across the aisle is really important. Second, so I would encourage you to continue developing those relationships and emphasizing the role of caucus. Second, talk about the national reach. And you mentioned this earlier in the conversation, that you're not just an Quebec or Ontario industry, you're national, you're across the country. So emphasize that national reach and the job creation element of it. We know that as part of the recovery, the government wants to see new jobs created, wants to see jobs go from part-time to full-time. And so that is a message of the store that the industry and the association can tell really well. And lastly, I need to talk about the She session. I need to talk about women in the industry. There's a government that cares a lot about the role of women, about gender analysis. And so, the association tell a story about the women in the sector, how they have been impacted and how they're helping to drive the industry forward as part of this recovery.
Oh, very, very good insights. Thank you. Well, I want to thank you all. Our members are probably used to seeing you either, on TV or reading, your comments in the paper. So this is just a real treat to have a bit of a discussion here for our members. So on behalf of our members, thank you for the great discussion. And also thank you for the support of our industry. Just for everyone out there, if you want more information on AIC, please visit aic.ca. And if you want to get in touch with any of our panelists, please contact them directly, or get in touch with AIC, and we can make sure we make the connection. So again, thank you everyone for the time, and we'll probably speak to you again at some point.
Thanks so much, Mike.
That's a wrap for this episode, and thanks for listening. Please check out aic.ca for more information, or if you would like to join AIC to be part of the conversation.